The sudden shift in Washington's tone came like a lightning strike across the political landscape. Only days earlier, President Trump had been speaking in his usual forceful, uncompromising style, declaring that his administration would never back down in the ongoing geopolitical standoff. Yet, overnight, the White House's language changed. Sharp rhetoric was replaced with a guarded, almost hesitant tone. The news networks were quick to pounce, with headlines blaring that Trump was pulling back, scaling down certain demands, and considering concessions that had seemed unthinkable just a week before. The initial shockwaves spread rapidly. Stock markets in Europe and Asia showed immediate fluctuations, with energy prices dipping, then rising, as traders tried to interpret what this new development might mean for stability. In Washington, some saw the retreat as a shrewd tactical pause, a way to regroup and avoid unnecessary escalation. Others viewed it as a sign of weakness, a political miscalculation that could cost the United States dearly on the world stage. The confusion only added to the drama, leaving allies uncertain and rivals quietly celebrating. In Moscow, however, there was no confusion. Inside the Kremlin's high-ceilinged meeting rooms, President Putin's senior advisors wasted no time in convening emergency strategy sessions. The opportunity was too good to ignore. To them, Trump's retreat was more than just a news headline. It was an opening, a crack in the armor of American resolve, and it was up to Russia to decide how wide that crack could be pried open. Every advisor in the room knew that geopolitical influence was built not just on military power or economic leverage, but on moments like this, moments when perception mattered as much as reality. Putin listened intently as reports came in from intelligence officers and foreign policy experts. They outlined the situation in meticulous detail. Key U.S. allies were unsettled, NATO's messaging was inconsistent, and Washington's diplomatic channels were suddenly less aggressive. The Russian leader understood instinctively that in politics, hesitation from your opponent is an invitation. The question was not whether to act, but how quickly and in what manner. The plan took shape rapidly. Rather than openly gloat or push aggressively in public, Moscow would take a more subtle approach, allowing the world to notice Trump's hesitation while carefully positioning Russia as the calm, rational actor ready to restore balance. The brilliance of this tactic was that it would frame Putin not as the instigator, but as the stabilizer, all while securing hidden advantages behind the scenes. In parallel, Russian economic advisors began drafting proposals for energy partnerships and trade arrangements that could be quietly offered to countries now questioning Washington's reliability. Defense officials explored ways to reposition forces in a way that was symbolic enough to send a message but not so provocative as to spark immediate backlash. Every move was designed to be part of a larger chess game, one in which each piece advanced methodically toward a position of dominance. As the hours passed, it became increasingly clear that this was not just a fleeting diplomatic moment, it was the beginning of a strategic realignment. Putin, a veteran at turning small shifts into sweeping changes, could already envision how this retreat might ripple outward, influencing global perceptions for months or even years to come. The Kremlin's objective was simple but ambitious: transform a single sign of American hesitation into a lasting symbol of Russian strength. By the time the sun rose over Moscow the following day, the strategy was set. Russia would not merely react, it would shape the next phase of the game. And in the quiet confidence of the Kremlin's inner circle, there was an unspoken understanding: this was a rare opportunity, and they intended to squeeze every possible advantage from it. The shift in public tone was just the beginning. With the initial strategy set, the Kremlin moved to phase 2, shaping the narrative. Putin knew that words could be as powerful as weapons, and in the modern information battlefield, perception could tip the balance of power faster than tanks or missiles. The goal was to project an image of calm mastery while the United States appeared to waver. Every speech, every statement, every press conference from this point on would be part of a meticulously choreographed performance. The first message came in the form of a carefully worded address. Standing at a podium draped in the Russian tricolor, Putin spoke not with bluster, but with measured authority. He called for stability in the international order and the need for dialogue between great powers to avoid unnecessary conflict. To the casual observer, it sounded like a plea for peace. But for those reading between the lines, it was a subtle declaration. Russia was now the steady hand on the wheel, the adult in the room, while America stumbled. International media outlets replayed his remarks in endless loops. Commentators debated the implications. In European capitals, diplomats noted the difference in tone between Moscow's composed messaging and Washington's recent erratic signals. Even in countries that had traditionally aligned with the US, there were murmurs about whether Russia's position was becoming more appealing or at least, more predictable. Behind the public facade, the real work was happening in the shadows. Russian envoys began discreet talks with Western intermediaries, testing the waters for new trade deals, arms agreements, and energy contracts. The timing was deliberate. With Trump's administration focused on damage control, there was little bandwidth in Washington to monitor, let alone counter, these quiet negotiations. In Brussels, a veteran European diplomat was approached with a proposal for a gas supply guarantee that would lock in lower prices for a decade. In the Middle East, Russian representatives hinted at defense cooperation that could bolster local regime stability. Each offer was framed as mutually beneficial, yet subtly tied to reducing reliance on the United States. The brilliance lay in the framing. Russia wasn't undermining America, it was simply offering alternatives. Meanwhile, intelligence operations ran parallel to diplomacy. Russian cyber teams monitored US diplomatic chatter, looking for signs of further retreat or internal division. Psychological operations amplified stories on social media highlighting American inconsistency and portraying Russia as a rising guarantor of global order. It wasn't a full-scale propaganda blitz, at least not yet, but a soft, steady drip of influence, designed to seep into the political subconscious of allies and adversaries alike. Inside the Kremlin, Putin tracked developments with the patience of a chess grandmaster. He understood that his adversary's weakness wasn't permanent, political winds could shift quickly. But for the moment, Trump's retreat had given him a platform to expand Russia's influence with minimal resistance. His advisors marveled at the balance he maintained, moving aggressively in private while appearing moderate in public. The defining moment of the stage came during a closed-door session with senior security officials. A map of Europe, the Middle East, and Asia lay stretched across the conference table. Colored pins marked potential leverage points, energy hubs, strategic ports, and politically unstable capitals. Putin placed his hand on the map, tapping one pin after another as he spoke softly about building a network of influence that will outlast this moment. What had begun as an unexpected retreat from Washington was now being transformed into a calculated expansion from Moscow. The next moves would be bolder, more visible, but still within the careful framework that allowed Russia to claim the moral high ground. And as the wheels of strategy turned, one fact became increasingly clear: the Kremlin wasn't just reacting to events, it was rewriting the playbook altogether. The media campaign shifted into high gear. Russian state channels, already adept at weaving narratives, flooded their broadcasts with carefully curated footage of Putin meeting world leaders, visiting military installations, and addressing the Russian people in firm but reassuring tones. Every image was calculated to convey competence, control, and vision. Foreign correspondents were given just enough access to catch these moments, ensuring they would filter into Western broadcasts as well. Across Europe and Asia, the storyline began to take root. While Washington floundered in mixed messaging, Moscow was steady, prepared, and willing to take responsibility in global affairs. The Kremlin didn't have to attack the United States directly. The contrast in leadership styles was doing the work for them. Talk shows in Germany and France debated whether Russia had become the more reliable partner for energy and security. In the Middle East, political analysts noted that Putin's words resonated more with their leaders than the shifting tone from the White House. The information push was amplified online. Social media accounts, both official and anonymous, circulated stories highlighting U.S. missteps and promoting Russia's role as a stabilizer. Memes mocked the apparent retreat from Trump's earlier hardline stance, while infographics compared Russia's growing list of diplomatic agreements with America's stalled negotiations. This wasn't a chaotic propaganda blitz, it was a well-orchestrated drip of influence subtle enough to avoid outright dismissal, yet persistent enough to shape public perception. Meanwhile, inside Russia's foreign ministry, a breakthrough began to take shape. For weeks, behind closed doors, Russian diplomats had been mediating a tense dispute between two resource-rich nations. Both sides trusted Moscow's discretion, and with Trump's retreat casting doubt on U.S. mediation, the Kremlin became the natural choice to finalize an agreement. The deal, once concluded, would not only stabilize the region but also grant Russia lucrative trade and infrastructure contracts for decades to come. When the announcement finally came, it hit like a geopolitical thunderclap. In a lavish ceremony televised worldwide, the two rival leaders shook hands in Moscow, flanked by Putin and senior Russian officials. Cameras flashed, commentators buzzed, and analysts across the globe admitted begrudgingly or otherwise that Putin had pulled off a diplomatic coup. The agreement was hailed as a win for peace, but everyone understood it was also a win for Russian influence. In Washington, the reaction was a mix of frustration and damage control. The White House issued a statement congratulating the parties involved, but the subtext was clear: the United States had been sidelined. Within political circles, criticism mounted. Some accused Trump of allowing Russia to outmaneuver America on the world stage, while others insisted it was a calculated decision to avoid overextension. The ambiguity only deepened the perception of weakness. Back in Moscow, the atmosphere was one of quiet celebration. The Kremlin understood that the true value of the agreement went beyond its immediate economic and political benefits. It was the symbolism. Russia had stepped in where the United States had stepped back. And the world had noticed. Putin, reviewing the coverage in his private office, didn't linger on the victory. He knew that in geopolitics, today's win is tomorrow's starting point for a new challenge. Still, the satisfaction was undeniable. He had taken a moment of U.S. hesitation and turned it into a visible, tangible success that would be remembered. The mood in Washington had shifted from uncertainty to open tension. Inside the West Wing, advisors scrambled to craft a narrative that could soften the blow of Moscow's diplomatic victory. Some urged the president to frame the Kremlin's breakthrough as a shared success, an example of great powers working together for global stability. Others pushed for a harder line, accusing Russia of opportunism and warning allies not to be swayed by temporary illusions of leadership. But the damage was already done. In the halls of Congress, both opponents and uneasy allies of the president seized the moment. Senators from his own party questioned the wisdom of his earlier retreat, suggesting it had created a vacuum Russia was only too happy to fill. Across the aisle, critics called the episode a textbook example of how inconsistent foreign policy eroded America's credibility. Media outlets, both domestic and international, ran split-screen comparisons of Trump's reduced public appearances and Putin's confident handshakes with foreign leaders. The president's base remained loyal, insisting that avoiding direct confrontation was a sign of pragmatic leadership. But among the broader electorate, the optics were unforgiving. Poll numbers began to dip. Editorial headlines asked whether the U.S. had entered a post-leadership era on the global stage. Even longtime diplomatic partners quietly admitted off the record that they were beginning to hedge their bets, seeking backup channels with Moscow. Meanwhile, in the Kremlin, there was no rush to gloat. Putin understood that real influence was measured in sustainability, not spectacle. His next moves were deliberate, expanding economic partnerships with countries newly receptive to Russian overtures, strengthening military cooperation with strategic allies, and increasing Russia's footprint in global institutions that had once been firmly under Western sway. Each step was taken with the same methodical precision that had characterized the earlier phases of his plan. The defining moment came during a major international summit. Trump arrived late, avoiding the press, while Putin entered the hall surrounded by a cluster of world leaders eager for his ear. Cameras caught the contrast, and the image raced across news feeds worldwide, one leader diminished, the other ascendant. It was the kind of visual that no amount of press releases could undo. By the time the summit concluded, Russia had secured new trade agreements, defense commitments, and even preliminary discussions on joint space exploration projects with nations that had previously been wary of such partnerships. The message was clear: Russia was no longer just a regional power, it was an indispensable player in shaping the global agenda. As the dust settled, Putin reflected on the chain of events that had brought him here. What had started as a single, unexpected retreat by Washington had blossomed into a strategic windfall. The moment had been fleeting, but he had seized it completely, squeezing every ounce of advantage from it until the balance of perception and perhaps even power had shifted. In the United States, political operatives began planning for the next election cycle, aware that the Moscow moment, as the media now called it, would be a potent weapon for Trump's rivals. But in the Kremlin, the victory was already archived, not as a trophy, but as a lesson, a demonstration that in the high game of geopolitics, patience, timing, and the ability to turn an opponent's hesitation into decisive action were the ultimate tools of mastery.